Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business by Neil Postman. Introduction to the 20th Anniversary Edition. Now, this? A book of social commentary published 20 years ago? You're not busy enough writing emails, returning calls, downloading tunes, playing games, online, PlayStation, Game Boy, checking out websites, sending text messages, IMing, TiVoing, watching what you've TiVoed, browsing through magazines and newspapers, reading new books. Now you've got to stop and read a book that first appeared in the last century, not to mention the last millennium. Come on. Like your outlook on today could seriously be rocked by this plain-spoken provocation about the world of 1985. A world yet to be infiltrated by the internet, cell phones, PDAs, cable channels by the hundreds, DVDs, call waiting, caller ID, blogs, flat screens, HD TV, and iPods. Is it really plausible that this slim volume, with its once urgent premonitions about the nuanced and deep-seated perils of television, could feel timely today? The age of computers? Is it really plausible that this book, about how television is turning all public life, education, religion, politics, journalism, into entertainment, how the image is undermining other forms of communication, particularly the written word, and how our bottomless appetite for TV will make content so abundantly available, context be damned, that we'll be overwhelmed by information glut until what is truly meaningful is lost and we no longer care what we've lost as long as we're being amused? Can such a book possibly have relevance to you in the world of 2006 and beyond? I think you've answered your own question. I, too, think the answer is yes, but as Neil Postman's son, I'm biased. Where are we to find objective corroboration that reading Amusing Ourselves to Death in 2006, in a society that worships TV and technology as ours does, is nearly an act of defiance? One of those I didn't realize it was dark until someone flipped the switch encounters with an illuminating intellect. Let's not take the word of those who studied under my father at New York University, many of whom have gone on to teach in their own college and occasionally high school courses, what he argues in these pages. These fine minds are, as my father's was, of a bygone era. A different media environment, and their biases may make them, as they made him, hostage of another time, perhaps incapable of seeing the present world as it is, rather than as they'd like it to be. One man's R rating is another's PG-13. And just to make a clean slate of it, let's not rely either on the opinions of the numerous readers of the original edition of Amusing Ourselves to Death, translated into a dozen languages, including German, Indonesian, Turkish, Danish, and most recently, Chinese. So many of whom wrote to my father, or buttonholed him at public speaking events to tell him how dead on his argument was. Their support, while genuine, was expressed over the last 2 decades, so some of it might be outdated. We'll disregard the views of these teachers and students, business people and artists, conservatives and liberals, atheists and churchgoers, and all those parents. We'll also disregard Roger Waters, co-founder of the legendary band Pink Floyd, whose solo album Amused to Death was inspired by the book. Go Dad. So, whose opinion matters? In rereading this book to figure out what might be said about it 20 years later, I tried to think the way my father would, since he could no longer. He died in October of 2003, at age 72. Channeling him, I realize immediately who offers the best test of whether amusing ourselves to death is still relevant. College kids. Today's 18 to 22-year-olds live in a vastly different media environment from the one that existed in 1985. Their relationship to TV differs. Back then, MTV was in its late infancy. Today, news scrolls and corner-of-the-screen promos and reality shows and infomercials and 900 channels are the norm. And TV no longer dominates the media landscape. Screen time also means hours spent in front of the computer, video monitor, cell phone, and handheld. Multitasking is standard. Communities have been replaced by demographics. Silence has been replaced by background noise. It's a different world. It's different for all of us, of course. Children, young teens, parents, seniors. But college kids form an especially rich grouping, poised between innocence and sophistication, respect and irreverence. When today's students are assigned amusing ourselves to death, almost none of them have heard of Neil Postman or been exposed to his ideas. He wrote more than 20 books on such subjects as education, language, childhood, and technology, suggesting that their views, besides being pertinent, are relatively uncorrupted. I called several of my father's former students who are now teachers and who teach Amusing Ourselves to Death in courses that examine some cross-section of ideas about TV, culture, computing, technology, mass media, communications, politics, journalism, education, religion, and language. I asked the teachers what their students thought of the book, particularly its timeliness. The teachers were kind enough to share many of their students' thoughts from papers and class discussion. In the book, Postman makes the point that there is no reflection time in the world anymore, said a student named Jonathan. When I go to a restaurant, everyone's on their cell phone, talking or playing games. I have no ability to sit by myself and just think. Said Liz, it's more relevant now. In class, we asked if now that there's cable, which there really wasn't when the book was written, are there channels that are not just about entertainment? We tried to find one to disprove his theory. One kid said the Weather Channel, but another mentioned how they have all those shows on tornadoes and try to make weather fun. The only good example we came up with was C-SPAN, which no one watches. Kara, teachers are not considered good if they don't entertain their classes, remarked Ben, whose professor called him the class skeptic, and who, when the book was assigned, groaned, "Why do we have to read this?" Postman says TV makes everything about the present. And there we were, criticizing the book because it wasn't published yesterday. Reginald, this book is not just about TV. Sandra, the book was absolutely on target about the 2004 presidential election campaign and debates. One student pointed out that Arnold Schwarzenegger announced his candidacy for the California governorship on The Tonight Show. Maria noted that the oversimplification and thinking fragmentation promoted by TV watching may have contributed to our red state, blue state polarization. Another noted the emergence of a new series of Bible magazines, whose cover format is modeled on teen magazines with cover lines like Top 10 Tips for Getting Closer to God. It's religion mimicking an MTV kind of world, said the student. Others wondered if the recent surge in children diagnosed with attention deficit disorder was an indication of a need to be constantly stimulated. Caitlin switched her major to print journalism after reading the book. Andrea would recommend it to anyone concerned with media ethics. Mike said even those who won't agree with the book's arguments, as he did not, should still read it, to be provoked. Many students, left-wingers and right-wingers alike, said the professor, were especially taken with my father's "now this" idea. The phenomenon whereby the reporting of a horrific event, a rape or a five-alarm fire or global warming, is followed immediately by the anchors cheerfully exclaiming, "Now this," which segues into a story about Janet Jackson's exposed nipple or a commercial for light beer, creating a sequencing of information so random, so disparate in scale and value, as to be incoherent, even psychotic. Another teacher remarked that students love how the book is told, by a writer who's at heart a storyteller. They love that he refers to books and people they've heard of, she said. Allison. He doesn't dumb it down. He makes allusions to great art and poetry. Matt said that, ironically, Postman proves you can be entertaining and without a single picture. Of her students' impressions, one teacher said, he speaks to them without jargon, in a way in which they feel respected. They feel he's just having a conversation with them, but inspiring them to think at the same time. Another professor noted that kids come to the conclusion that TV is almost exclusively interested in presenting show business and sensationalism, and in making money. Amazing as it seems, they had never realized that before. It no doubt appears to you that, after all my grand talk of objectivity, I've stacked the deck in favor of the book's virtue. But that's honestly the overwhelming reaction. At least among a slice of Generation Y, a population segment that one can imagine has as many reasons not to like the book as to like it. One professor said that in a typical class of 25 students who read the book, 23 will write papers that either praise or are animated by its ideas. 2 will say the book was a stupid waste of time. A 92% rating? There's no one who expresses an idea, certainly no politician, who wouldn't take that number. Of course, students had criticisms of the book too. Many didn't appreciate the assault on television, a companion to them, a source of pleasure and comfort, and felt as if they had to defend their culture. Some consider TV their parents' culture, not theirs. They are of the internet. So the book's theses were less relevant. Some thought my father was anti-change, that he so exalted the virtues fostered by the written word and its culture, he was not open to acknowledging many of the positive social improvements TV had brought about, and what a democratic and leveling force it could be. Some disagreed with his assessment that TV is in complete charge. Remote control, an abundance of channels and VCRs and DVRs all enable you to customize your programming, even to skip commercials. A common critique was that he should have offered solutions. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube after all, so what now? And there was this, what he said in 1985 had come startlingly true. We had amused ourselves to death. So why read it? One professor uses the book in conjunction with an experiment she calls an e-media fast. For 24 hours, each student must refrain from electronic media. When she announces the assignment, she told me, 90% of the students shrug, thinking it's no big deal. But when they realize all the things they must give up for a whole day, cell phone, computer, internet, TV, car radio, etc., they start to moan and groan. She tells them they can still read books. She acknowledges it will be a tough day, though for roughly 8 of the 24 hours, they'll be asleep. She says if they break the fast, if they answer the phone, say, or simply have to check email, they must begin from scratch. The papers I get back are amazing, says the professor. They have titles like The Worst Day of My Life or The Best Experience I Ever Had. Always extreme. I thought I was going to die, they'll write. I went to turn on the TV, but if I did, I realized, my God, I'd have to start all over again. Each student has his or her own weakness. For some, it's TV, some the cell phone, some the internet or their PDA. But no matter how much they hate abstaining or how hard it is to hear the phone ring and not answer it, they take time to do things they haven't done in years. They actually walk down the street to visit their friend. They have extended conversations. One wrote, I thought to do things I hadn't thought to do ever. The experience changes them. Some are so affected that they determine to fast on their own, 1 day a month. In that course, I take them through the classics, from Plato and Aristotle through today, and years later, when former students write or call to say hello, the thing they remember is the media fast. Like the media fast, amusing ourselves to death is a call to action. It is, in my father's words, an inquiry and a lamentation. Yes, but it aspires to greater things. It is an exhortation to do something. It's a counterpunch to what my father thought daily TV news was. Inert, consisting of information that gives us something to talk about, but cannot lead to any meaningful action. Dad was a lover of history, a champion for collective memory, and what we now quaintly refer to as civilizing influences. But he did not live in the past. His book urges us to claim a way to be more alert and engaged. His ideas are still here, he isn't, and it's time for the reins to be grabbed by those of a new generation, natives of this brave new world who understand it better. 20 years ago isn't what it used to be. Where once it stood for a single generation, now it seems to stand for 3. Everything moves faster. Change changed, my father wrote in another book. A lot has changed since this book appeared. News consumption among the young is way down. Network news and entertainment divisions are far more entwined, despite protests, some genuine, some perhaps not, by the news divisions. When Jon Stewart, host of Comedy Central's The Daily Show, went on CNN's Crossfire to make this very point, that serious news and show business ought to be distinguishable, for the sake of public discourse and the Republic, the host seemed incapable of even understanding the words coming out of his mouth. The soundbite is now more like a sound nibble, and it's rare, even petulant, to hear someone challenge its absurd insubstantiality. The question of how television affects us has receded into the background. Dad's words, not mine, from 1985. Fox News has established itself and thrived. Corporate conglomeration is up, particularly among media companies. Our own media companies don't provide truly gruesome war images as part of the daily news, but then they didn't do so 20 years ago either, though 40 years ago they did. The quality of graphics, i.e. the reality quotient of computer and video games, is way up. Communities exist that didn't, thanks to the internet, particularly peer-to-peer computing. A new kind of collaborative creativity abounds, thanks to the open source movement, which gave us the Linux operating system. However, other communities are collapsing. Far fewer people join clubs that meet regularly. Fewer families eat dinner together, and people don't have friends over to know their neighbors the way they used to. More school administrators and politicians and business executives hanker to wire schools for computers, as if that is the key to improving American education. The number of hours the average American watches TV has remained steady, at about 4.5 hours a day, every day. By age 65, a person will have spent 12 uninterrupted years in front of the TV. Childhood obesity is way up. Some things concern our children more than they used to, some not at all. Maybe there's more hope than there was, maybe less. Maybe the amount is a constant. Substantive as this book is, it was predicated on a hook that one British writer, George Orwell, with a frightening vision of the future. A vision that many feared would come true, was mostly off base, while another British writer, Aldous Huxley, with a frightening vision of the future, a vision less well known and less feared, was scarily on target. My father argued his points persuasively, but it was a point for another time. The age of television. New technologies and media are in the ascendancy. Fortunately, and this more than anything, is what I think makes amusing ourselves to death so emphatically relevant. My father asked such good questions that they can be asked of non-television things. Of all sorts of transforming developments and events that have happened since 1985. And since his death, of things still unformed for generations to come. Though generations to come may someday mean a span of 3 years. His questions can be asked about all technologies and media. What happens to us when we become infatuated with and then seduced by them? Do they free us or imprison us? Do they improve or degrade democracy? Do they make our leaders more accountable or less so? Our system more transparent or less so? Do they make us better citizens are better consumers? Are the trade-offs worth it? If they're not worth it, yet we still can't stop ourselves from embracing the next new thing because that's just how we're wired, then what strategies can we devise to maintain control? Dignity? Meaning? My father was not a curmudgeon about all this, as some thought. It was never optimism he lacked, it was certainty. We must be careful in praising or condemning because the future may hold surprises for us, he wrote. Nor did he fear TV across the board, as some thought. Junk television was fine. The A-Team and Cheers are no threat to our public health, he wrote. 60 Minutes, Eyewitness News, and Sesame Street are. A student of Dad's, a teacher himself, says his own students were more responsive to amusing ourselves to death, not less, than they were 5 or 10 years ago. When the book first came out, it was ahead of its time, and some people didn't understand its reach, he says. It's a 21st century book published in the 20th century. In 1986, soon after the book was published, and it started to make ripples, Dad was on ABC's Nightline, discussing with Ted Koppel the effect TV can have on a society if we let it control us, rather than vice versa. As I recall, at one juncture, to illustrate his point that our brief attention span and our appetite for feel-good content can short-circuit any meaningful discourse, Dad said, "For example, Ted, we're having an important discussion about the culture, but in 30 seconds we'll have to break for a commercial to sell cars or toothpaste." Mr. Koppel, one of the rare serious figures on network television, smiled wryly. Or was it fatigue? "Actually, Dr. Postman," he said, "it's more like 10 seconds. There's still time." Andrew Postman, Brooklyn, New York, November 2005. In 1985. If you were alert back then, this refresher may be unnecessary, even laughable. If you were not alert then, this may just be laughable. But it also may help to clarify references in the book about things of that moment. In 1985, the United States population is 240 million. The Cold War is still on, though Mikhail Gorbachev has just become the Soviet leader. Ronald Reagan is president. Other major political figures include Walter Fritz Mondale, Democratic presidential nominee the year before, Geraldine Ferraro, his vice presidential running mate, and presidential hopefuls Senators Gary Hart and John Glenn, the latter a former astronaut. Ed Koch is mayor of New York City. David Garth is a top media consultant for political candidates. Top-rated TV shows include Dynasty, Dallas, though it has been several years since the drama of Who Shot JR gripped the TV-watching nation. The A-Team, Cheers, and Hill Street Blues. Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, and Peter Jennings are the nightly network news anchors. The MacNeil-Lehrer News Hour is, as the news hour with Jim Lehrer years later will be, public television's respected, low-rated evening news program. Televangelism is enjoying a heyday. Leading practitioners include Jimmy Swaggart, Pat Robertson, Jim Bakker, Billy Graham, Jerry Falwell, Robert Schuller, and Oral Roberts. Howard Cosell has recently retired after many years as TV's most recognizable sports voice. The show Entertainment Tonight and the cable network MTV, both born a few years earlier, are runaway successes. Two of the most successful TV commercial campaigns are American Express's series about far-flung tourists losing travelers' checks and Whisk detergent spot about ring around the collar, about which my father wrote a provocative and funny essay called The Parable of the Ring Around the Collar. The Mac computer is 1 year old, USA Today 3, People Magazine 10. Dr. Ruth Westheimer hosts a popular radio call-in show, offering sex advice with cheer and grandmotherly frankness. African Americans are known as blacks. Martina Navratilova is the world's best female tennis player. Trivial Pursuit is a top-selling board game. Certain entertainers to whom my father refers, e.g. comedians Shecky Greene, Red Buttons, and Milton Berle, singer Dionne Warwick, TV talk show host David Susskind, are past their prime. Even then. Andrew Postman. Forward. We were keeping an eye on 1984. When the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we, at least, had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another, slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warns us that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we will become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we will become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgy-porgy, and the centrifugal bumblepuppy. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny, quote, failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions, unquote. In 1984, Huxley added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. This book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right.